Conscient Podcast, another episode from the Creative Cultural Leadership course. In fact, it's day 5. I'm with Marda Kirn, who will introduce herself in just a moment. But I want to tell a story from earlier this morning. Marda and I went for a bit of a sound walk and talked about all kinds of things that we will converse in a second. But the recorder didn't work. And I told the group this morning that it was just meant to be, because I really was listening very intently, and I felt like I internalized what you said. So this is a second shot, and of course it'll be different. But there's so many things that we can talk about, because I'm really interested in your work, and so thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. So why don't you tell me a bit who you are, what kind of work you do, and then we'll get into what this podcast is exploring, which is how the arts contribute to environmental awareness and environmental action.
So I started out as a dancer and had a big dance festival in the United States that we produced. That was a month-long festival. Brought in, I don't think we ever brought Canadians in, but I did want to, though. But we brought people in from all over the United States and sometimes Europe and other places, Cuba, and to perform and teach for a month. And then I got interested in climate change, and I did some other things, and then I started Eco Arts Connections, where I'm the director. And Eco Arts Connections brings the arts together with science, social justice, indigenous, and other ways of knowing to inspire people to live sustainably. But we define sustainability really broadly, so it's not just environmental sustainability, but also economic, social, cultural, personal sustainability. And we really try to help people understand the relationships among them all. And basically we're producers, and we produce performances, exhibits, talks, tours, convenings, youth programs, and parades sometimes, and various other things. Just recently did a very short film. But we always do it in collaboration with other entities, and those entities can be, big, huge science organizations like the National Center for Atmospheric Research or NOAA, or they can be tiny mobile home communities where we have a number of projects, especially for Latinx youth and their parents, mostly Spanish-only speaking folks.
So why don't you tell me a little bit what you presented this morning, your work on arts and science and points of collaboration. I was really fascinated with the way that you've sort of synthesized, and you've made it clear that there are paths for artists to work with other sectors, and there's a real need also for artists to step up and to contribute to climate change. The presentation I gave this morning was really based on mistakes. All of these mistakes that we've made. And I guess the first one, I'll just tell a little story, and that is when we first were bringing artists and scientists together, it was a brilliant art historian and critic, Lucy Lepard. And she chose 51 artists from mostly around the United States, but some international, so that we could exhibit their work. And for those artists that were going to make new pieces, we offered them the opportunity to collaborate with scientists or other folks. And several of those artists said yes, they would like to. And so I went to my collaborator at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Linda Carbone, who was just terrific. And I said, Linda, we have artists and they want to work with scientists, climate scientists. And she said very dryly, she said, what kind of climate scientists? We have buildings filled with them. I just love that line so much, because we had no clue. I'm a climate scientist. That was, as wide as our understanding was. We didn't know what a geomorphologist was, or a hydrologist, or middle atmospheric dynamicist, or any of those words. But they didn't know anything about. They didn't know the difference between a performance artist and a performing artist, let alone a social practice artist. So we came up with this solution out of desperation, really, and that was to ask people to go for their point of wonder. And what that means is that you try to think of what's the question you have, what's the challenge you want to address, or the problem you want to solve. And if you can focus in on that, then you can bring in all kinds of collaborators from lots of fields, not just science, who share that same burning question. And what's so really lovely about that is that it tends to minimize the sort of weirdnesses that can happen with collaborations where scientists might think that they're not creative enough, or artists feel like they don't know enough, and there are kind of inferiorities that go in on the collaboration. But this kind of erases it, because you're really co-travelers along the same path, and you're both really excited about solving this problem and learning from each other. So that's really,
and
what
that
I think.
The creative energy from both sides, or all sides, identifies common objectives. So that point of, what do you call it again?
Point of wonder.
Point of wonder. So that because scientists are curious and are creative, and so are artists, but sometimes they don't necessarily find common ground. So you're saying that it's relatively easy to find common ground when you're both excited about the same idea, or the
Exactly.
potential idea.
Exactly. And what's so it's really kind of a magical thing, because then suddenly people have time for you, and suddenly there are resources that come about, and often, not always, but often, there's also money that comes, and people just, it's like a stone soup. People just contribute into this pot because they're really thrilled about exploring this point of wonder together. Another kind of, the thing that I talked about this morning was sort of like hot tips born from mistakes.
Sounds good.
And another one was the idea of shifting the centricity. And centricity is a real word. I did look it up, but and a centricity is like a focal point. And I thought at one point that we were really needing a kind of Copernican revolution in our thinking, in terms of bringing together collaborations and just thinking about a lot of things in the world. And what I mean by that is pre-Copernicus, folks in the Western world, educated folks, thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. It's called a geocentric universe, and that all the sun and the moon and all the planets revolved around the Earth. And then after Copernicus, people realized, well, actually, no, the Earth was not the center. The sun was the center of the solar system, and the Earth was one of many orbs that revolves around the sun. And I feel like it's a similar thing right now, that we, in the arts, and every discipline has this, you think that you're the center, your discipline is the center of the universe, and everything should revolve around it. but that's really not so helpful. It's much better to put the point of wonder in the middle, or whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve, in the center of the universe, and then your discipline and your project can then join forces with a whole bunch of other ones. And so, in a way, it's kind of like a shift from me to we, which I think is really important in these times. And the second centricity shift is really is based on this another mistake that I made, and a lot of people make this mistake. When you first find out about climate change, or species extinction, or any of these horrible things, you just are so. It's so horrifying. You want to wake everybody up, and you want to scare the bejesus out of them to wake them up. But there's so much social science research now that shows that totally not a good thing to do, because when people are frightened like that, they tend to go into denial, or put the covers over their head, or worse, they sort of give up and they say, oh, well, might as well pollute because we're all going to die anyway. What's the point? What's the use? I have no power. So instead of doing that, instead of doing what I call the uh-oh, we shift to the aha, which is, what's the solution? What are the possibilities of... Lexis Frost spoke also this morning, brilliant thinker and writer, and she talked about the need for us passing through grief, for those of us who know about climate change and all these other horrible environmental things that are happening, to go through grief and to realize that that process requires us to go through a period of fear and anxiety and confusion and doubt in order to transform ourselves and the world around us to get through to the other side. And if you're working on aha instead of uh-oh, you can really make that passage happen, as opposed to getting stuck in it. And then another thing to be thinking about is was another mistake where I came with my wonderful project and would go and talk to a scientist or a school teacher, or, and think, oh, well, they're going to just drop everything and work on my thing. And of course not. They were already utterly maxed out. Teachers in the United States especially, it's a miracle if they're vertical at the end of the day because they have so much stress on them. And so I realized this sort of metaphor of wheels on suitcases, which is how many centuries have we had luggage? How many centuries have we had wheels? Somebody put them together, and then suddenly all over the world on flat airport surfaces there are wheeled suitcases. And it makes it so much easier and more efficient and more fun to transport luggage. So for me in my work, that meant looking around and seeing what already exists and what can I put together in new ways to make things more efficient and effective and fun. So one of the examples that I gave is when I spoke this morning is in the United States that we have these National Science Foundation grants. And the scientists who get funded by NSF are required to do what's called broader impacts. And that means they have to somehow get their work out to a much wider public than other scientists reading papers to each other in a science conference. And artists, because they so often do reach hundreds more, sometimes thousands more people through their artwork, can partner with scientists and help them get those fulfill those requirements of broader impacts, and also get funded at the same time. So that's helpful. And then the last sort of hot tip was the idea of head, heart, and hand. And that is really looking at the Trinity of Action, I think it's called, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the person who said that, but the idea of it is that you have to have cognition, which is the head, and mind, intellect, reasoning, analysis, working together with the heart, which is emotions, feelings, values, attitudes, and belief, in order to have the hand work and have effective action. So most of the time, most of my collaborations would get stuck in just the head and the heart part, putting together scientists with artists. And I didn't realize that both of them, of course they both do things, but both of them are still kind of working in a theoretical realm compared to those people who are working, you could say, working on the ground, who are working in sustainability. We call them the Sustainablists. Mm-hmm. And they are those sustainability professionals that work in the arenas of food, energy, water, transportation, waste, healthcare. There's a whole urban planning. There's a whole series of things. And they're working on the day-to-day to make a new world. Or they can also be stuck in the old one. But in terms of climate change, they're the ones that are trying to figure out, well, if the temperature raises, what happens to the roads? Because or the tarmacs in airports, because at a certain point they're going to start to melt. So what happens then? I remember I was the guest at the National Center for Atmospheric Research annual conference, and there were climate scientists from all over the world, and they had a presentation with people, sustainability managers from the cities of New York, Chicago, and there was a third one. And I remember listening to the person from New York, I think Adam Freed was his name maybe, talking about, because they're planners, so they're thinking at least 30 years out, right? What were they going to do about sea level rise in Manhattan? Were they going to build a huge wall? Were they going to, they were listing, this is in 2007, listing all these things. And I remember I turned to my friend there and I said, I feel like a spy. Can I tell people about this? Because it was just so amazing to me. It was just sort of as a matter of course. And the person from Chicago was talking about what were they going to do when the temperature rises, because it's going to wipe out all the air conditioning systems in the hospitals. And what's going to happen with all the people who are sick there. And anyway, they were talking about all these amazing things as definite reality, not yet another climate model. This was a real thing. So anyway, so I realized that it's one thing to have the scientists and the artists coming together, and a very important thing, but to go beyond awareness and into action, you really have to have the sustainablists involved. And I sort of came up with this little sort of, I don't know, it's an equation, but it's like the scientists can tell us the what, the observable evidence of what's happening or what they believe to be coming, what they know to be coming. The artists can provide the so what, why is it important, what does it mean, why should we care? And the sustainablists can provide the now what do we do, and how do we move forward?
I love that trilogy because it's very empowering. It's like an engineer working with a designer, working with, any combination of skills, and that you need all those parts.
Right.
And then in the flow and the questioning and the synergies that are created between them to come up not with solutions, but an understanding of of where we're at. Because
right.
I love it when you say from consciousness to from awareness to action, right? Because that's what I'm interested in understanding better, because so many artists are interested in the awareness piece.
Right.
If only we can explain, the situation, and yet people still don't respond.
Right.
But if artists use their craft to not just raise awareness, but to bring people into a relationship or some kind of connection to the issues that brings people to action from their own volition, it's very hard to force somebody to say, wake up.
Right. Right.
We're talking about the post-woke era now, that some people are awake and they don't know what to do.
Exactly.
And so you need that pragmatic, and also I'll try to pronounce it, sustainablist.
Excellent. Yes.
But it's a fun concept. So
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think I think we need to better understand these interconnections and change our funding systems, change our production systems to be able to have that trilogy and all those forces working together. And I had asked you this morning, and I'll ask you again, what kind of advice you have for artists who want to work on climate change issues. I mean, you've just given a series of tips, but are there any other thoughts or suggestions that you think that artists can work from in order to have more impact on environmental and climate change topics?
I think. There are a couple of things that I don't know the answers yet to, but I'm really curious about. And one is kind of what I'm calling the ecosystem of change, and trying to figure out, at what Aviva Romani, who's a really brilliant artist, talks about the acupuncture points of trying to look at a system and where can you best put your needle, so to speak, in terms of having the deepest effect. And I think, artists can be involved in that awareness part and in that behavior shift part, but being able to actually have deep conversations with people who really don't, it's not that they don't understand the power of the arts. And it's just because they just haven't been exposed to it. I mean, a lot of people, and I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, where we sort of glibly say, a lot of people think of the visual arts as, a painting and doesn't match my couch. Seriously, and that's only because that's their familiarity. They don't have that training. And a lot of people who don't understand that artists, for example, we are trained, our imagination is trained to, it's what we do. And so whether or not we actually make a piece of art or dance or, compose music, just having us in a room can be really helpful, because we are taught to look at things in a different way. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I always want to have a secret camera. There's when I bring people together from different disciplines, to look at a given problem, there's this moment where there's a kind of release and a permission in the room to be creative, even though, the non-artists aren't necessarily trained to be creative as part of what they do. A lot of disciplines are trained to not be creative, but really to think about numbers. And it's not that there isn't creativity in numbers. There's great creativity, but it's just a different way of being. And I think that that's something that artists are so helpful for, because we don't know how to get out of this problem. I mean, there was this at this moment. I have just a quick story. There's a really brilliant choreographer who's based in New York, Larry Kagwin, and we worked with the Newman Center for Performing Arts in Denver to co-commission a new work from him. And it was about inspired by sustainability, and he did this dance work that involved almost 60 people from the ages of 3 to 65 or something like that, non-dancers. And some of them were dancers, but mostly non-dancers. And there was a point in the piece where everybody had a backpack. And in the backpack, they had crumpled up pieces of paper in advance. And they, at a certain point, ran across the stage and took the pieces of paper out of their backpack and threw it on the floor. And suddenly all the people were gone, and the floor was covered by almost 2 feet worth of crumpled paper. And there was this pause just long enough for you to register this image. And then suddenly all the people came back and they picked up all the pieces of paper and they left a bare stage. And you just realize in an instant, my God, we created all of this litter on the earth, one piece at a time, one human at a time. We could clean it up the same way. And it's so thrilling of a possibility. And that was just boom, in probably the passage of, 2 minutes, not even. And an artist can do that.
We talked over the week about networks, and I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about networks, and you gave an interesting example of using species as a metaphor for a type of networking. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's I always, when we put together collaborations, we think of what we call ecosystemic programming. So if you imagine each discipline that you're working with, or each field, as a different species, we try to put together collaborations so the lions get to be lions, the bears get to be bears. We do everything, but we do everything together using the strengths of each of those species. And network weaving is a new field, a new terminology invented by June Hawley, and maybe a few other people were involved in there. But the whole idea of it is it's a different kind of leadership. So instead of having sort of top-down hierarchical, often pyramidical, I don't know if that's a word, but in a pyramid kinds of organizational structures, network weaving is really about dispersed leadership, and the idea that the lions get to be lions, the bears get to be bears, but we do everything together, in the sense that it makes it possible for different organizations, different entities that all have their own leaders and their own ways of working to be able to work together on common goals. And what I love about it so much is this, we were talking earlier off the air of tipping points, and what is it that can make it so that we are going to make it in terms of climate change? Because the UN has this goal of 50% decarbonization by 2030. So how are we going to make this? So we have to create movements. We just have to. And I always think, I live in the Rocky Mountains, and I think about the whole hydrological cycle and about how it rains, and there are these little rivulets and then they become streams, and then they become rivers, and then they become the Mississippi or whatever it is. I mean, there's this, how does this all happen? And I'm feeling like right now, network weaving is one of those things that can really bring us together in new ways without sacrificing diversity, which I think we have to honor.
It might even enhance diversity because
Absolutely.
everyone works from a position of strength, and yet there's a common goal and commonalities. Let's end with it's been a tough week for the world with COVID-19 being just really starting its way, and this leadership course had to deal with that. And yesterday I was really amazed by how this group of artists and cultural leaders took it on as a challenge and as a situation where artists could step up to the plate and do something about the fact that people will have more free time, or at least make suggestions on how the artists can make this situation more meaningful in terms of understanding some of the root causes of climate changes and some of the changes that we need to make in society. So I don't know how you felt, but to me it was a moment of a very empowering moment to see how imaginative we were,
Right.
coming up with all kinds of ideas, but also articulating some guiding principles and some deep thought on what it meant for humanity to be into this period of what I believe is transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we really can't go back. We have severely affected biodiversity, and as a result, we're starting to see situations like viruses that are very difficult to handle from a public health point of view. So I don't know how you felt about that this week, but I was impressed.
It was so thrilling to me, and it made me so proud of the power of the arts and artists. As you say, there were so many ideas, and I think there was one that was I'm laughing because we had this extraordinary person there from Live Nation, which is a company that is, some people may know, is the incredible concert producer, and we were told that a Live Nation concert happens every 20 minutes around the world. I mean, it's just such an enormous country, and so the people in her group were talking about how we need to have viral aid. We need to have real incredible fundraising things that happen online in order to combat the virus. And also there was a woman, Emily Lyon, who's a wonderful dramaturg, and she was saying, we need to come up with this sort of way of being, or a slogan that talks about don't cancel, reimagine. What could we be doing online in terms of theater, for example? Because could there be ways of dispersing scripts and having people read them in some sort of technological, which I can never remember all the different names of, Slack or whatever it is, to make that kind of possible. And how can artists be there for people in times of grief, or somehow make it easier for us to now suddenly be in a new way of life? And I think that I want to just maybe close or just add this into the mix of a quote that I love so much from the Native American activist Winona LaDuke. And she said one time, it's as if we're on a raft and we all know we're drowning. She said, but if we could, and we don't know how to swim. She said, but if we could see another raft up ahead, even those of us who can't swim would dive into that water and make our way to that raft. Help me build that raft. And I feel like that's one of the things that artists can be so incredibly involved and helpful at this moment, along with scientists and sustainablists and all kinds of people, to really come together and say, we have to shift. It could be really hard. It could be really fun. We just have to try and go for it.
Thank you, Marda. That was a great conversation. We'll keep
you.
in touch because you and I are both networking people,
Right.
curious, and I think it's there's a need to connect ideas, people, create movements, encourage. This course is really training for mostly younger people who will be the leaders of the future. So it's an investment that, and I congratulate you and the organizers, Julie's Bicycle, and the funders of this course, because it has been empowering, I think, for the participants. And I was a participant, and I feel that there's a much deeper understanding now of the issues and of the possibilities of all. The toolkit is much bigger now.
Right, it's much bigger. I just have to say, dear listeners, that Claude is an amazing person and human and thinker, as is Aaron Woods from Banff, and they're Canadians who are, proud force with all those Yankees.
Yeah, well, we'll work together and we'll figure things out. Anyway, thank you, Marda.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.